are refugees? Refugees are people just like you and me. People with lives, plans, and dreams for the future. But war, violence, and persecution have forced them to make an incredibly difficult choice. Some faced danger because of who they are and what they believe. Some are in danger because they spoke out on behalf of their neighbors who were marginalized. Others have watched as their homes were destroyed and their neighborhoods became war zones. All of them left everything behind for a chance at safety for themselves and their families. Once refugees arrive in a new country, they register with the United Nations Refugee Agency to access protection and other benefits. Some live in refugee camps. Many live in cities and towns, beginning new lives in their host countries. There are more than 80 million people who have been forcibly displaced from their homes. 26 million are refugees as defined by the UN. Less than 1% of refugees get the opportunity to be resettled in a third country like the United States. How do refugees get resettled in the United States? Although they have made it out of immediate danger, some particularly vulnerable refugees cannot remain in the country they fled to. These refugees may have urgent medical needs, be survivors of torture, or they may be in danger of further persecution. The UN Refugee Agency identifies the refugees who are most in need of resettlement to a safe third country, like the United States, and refers their cases to the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program. These refugees undergo thorough background, biometric, security, and health screenings before being approved to travel to the United States. A regional resettlement support center provides information and classes to prepare them for life in the United States, and then their travel is booked. Each week, refugee resettlement agencies like CWS are assigned to the cases of arriving refugee families. As soon as these families arrive in the United States, we are there to welcome them to their new home and provide the services they need to rebuild their lives.
Good afternoon, everyone who's joining us. My name is Uplifting. I am a Church World Service Communication Specialist, and I'm delighted to be moderating this World Refugee Day panel. It's June 10th. It's 4 o'clock. World Refugee Day is in 10 days, but we're doing this panel because we feel that the stories of World Refugee Day continues more than one day. So with that, our theme today is uplifting the voices of newcomers. And so we thank you again for this, for joining this special occasion that we are celebrating the resilience and stories of newcomers into our community. Our panelists, whom I'm going to introduce in a second, will share their journeys and experiences and insights that will be able to highlight the challenge and triumphs of resettlement. I will begin with Luke Samuel. Luke is an immigrant from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and he moved to the United States in 2017. Luke is the founder and managing director of Sinos Communications Consulting LLC, based in Portland, Maine. Luke is also the host of Luke's 2 Cents podcast, which amplifies immigrant voices and socio-political issues. With a background in international diplomacy and community engagement, Luke brings a wealth of experiences to his work. Fidel is the CEO and founder of Congo Aid, and he's also the Idaho delegate for Refugee Congress. Fidel escaped civil war in the Congo at age 12 and embarked on a journey through 7 African countries in search of safety. After 8 homeless years, Fidel was relocated as a refugee to the United States in 2006. He is now a proud U.S. citizen residing in Boise, Idaho, with his family. His story is one of resilience, determination, as well as hope. And finally, last but not least, Victor Morales Psara is the digital organizer at Church World Service, leveraging his multicultural background to connect with diverse communities. With a wealth of experiences in various industries, Victor excels in fostering meaningful connection and driving impactful change. His journey is a testament to the power of resilience and adaptation in the face of adversity. Welcome to all three of you. We are extremely delighted to have you. Just briefly, for those who are joining us and would like to know what World Refugee Day is, World Refugee Day falls on June 20th every year, and it's dedicated to refugees, to honor the refugees around the world. World Refugee Day at first was held globally in June 2001 to accommodate the 50th anniversary of the 1951 Convention relating to the status of refugees. It was originally, World Refugee Day was originally known as the African Refugee Day before the United Nations Assembly officially designated it as an international day in December of 2000. I would like to welcome all of our panelists, and I am going to start with Luke. Luke, can you talk about some of the challenges you faced during your journey to get here, and how, if you have overcome any of them, and how you were able to do that?
Thank you, Abdi. Thank you, everyone. Yes, my journey to the US started in 2016, although I ended up being here in 2017. I was living and working in the Congo where I was born and raised. But I received the diagnosis with the birth of my newborn child, my daughter. It was a diagnosis that indicated that she had less than 6 months to live because of the condition she had at birth. It's called biliary atresia. It's a condition that affects the liver and makes it impossible for a person to live their entire life with their natural liver. They're going to have to require a liver transplant. Long story short, there was no treatment for my daughter in the Congo, and even the diagnosis we were given in the first place required a second opinion because there was no certainty given the medical shortage, technological shortage and resource shortage in the Congo. We started by going to South Africa for a second opinion, and they told us that they did not have the resources to tackle that issue, and our only hope to survive was to be sent to a northern hemisphere country that has the facilities and the technology to address the problem. So our journey did not immediately start with political concerns, although I have served, as you said, in political circles as a foreign aid to foreign government. I worked for about 10 years for the South African government as a political resource. One of the permanent members of the Office of the South African Ambassador in the Congo. And that put me in the forefront of a lot of situations which were very challenging at moments because it comes with the job. At times you find yourself dealing with death threats, especially following the translation of strategic meetings. So not to give you a word salad, I want to focus on the family's journey. So we went to the American Embassy after we were able to garner support from a few thousand individuals we did not quite know for the most part on social media, who put together small resources, small donations of $5, $15, $70 for us to be able to put together about $14,000 to try and bring my daughter to medical doctors in the US. So as we were leaving the Congo after getting a US visa, which was a temporary visa, a 6-month visa, we never anticipated that America was going to be the place we're going to live. But we had nurtured the hope that we'll get medical help for our daughter and go back to the Congo. And as we got in the US, that's when our eyes started opening up to the reality of immigration. For example, from the moment we landed in Chicago, or from Turkey, I mean, we flew from the Congo to Turkey, and from Turkey to, we called the connecting flight to Chicago. As we landed, it was just a few days after President Trump had been inaugurated as new president in the US. And the attitude of, for those who had been at the border at the time, was conflated with a desire to be a little more coarse toward foreigners, and especially immigrants. And the gentleman was reviewing our visa documents, determined that our story was not true, that our baby was not sick, and that we needed to be sent back home. And for us to be sent back home to the Congo would mean the end of the life of my daughter. So that's how it started. So the earliest challenges. And thank God, because we were sent to the back office for the review of our case. And the people who reviewed the case determined that everything was organic, because we had the paperwork and our daughter's condition could be verified. And there was a medical facility that was expecting us in Omaha, Nebraska. So from Chicago, we ended up in Omaha, Nebraska. We were received and welcomed in a facility that was not really expecting us, because we were invited by doctors, and the hospital did not invite us. That staged another level of challenge for us. So besides the medical, besides the immigration piece, we started dealing with medical challenges. We discovered that healthcare in the US was extremely expensive and that we could not afford it. To make a long story short, my daughter needed almost $1 million for her to get the medical attention she needed. We didn't have $1 million. We became homeless in Omaha, Nebraska, and we were squatting from one room to the other, depending on who was generously hosting us for a period of time. Then from Omaha, Nebraska, we decided 5 months down the road that this well has run dry. We will try up northeast, because we heard about a place called Portland, Maine, where the government policies tend to be more lenient toward immigrants, and hopefully there's going to be a solution for our daughter. This is how we ended up packing our stuff, and with the help of a few friends, we ended up in Portland, Maine. And my daughter was maintained alive. Instead of 6 months of life, she was maintained alive for 3 years by the medical facilities here in Maine. And 3 years down the road, she finally got a liver transplant at the 11th hour, as she was about to pass away. So for us as a family, our experience has been particularly challenging at a physical and emotional level. But we feel like we have gone past that, and we're now facing what I like calling first world problems, because we happen to be stuck here pending for a permanent status, because we ended up filing for asylum. So the asylum process is not just extremely complex, but it's very demanding, because there's a lot of paperwork you need to file, and there's a number of submissions on a periodic basis for you to renew the documents that are allowing you to have permission to work and live in the US until the permanent review of your case. So I'm still planning for status, and that stages challenges of its own. And now the work I'm doing is mostly in support of people who've been on a parallel road than my situation, or also planning for status, but I'm supporting them with not just language and counsel, but also advocacy for their integration. In a nutshell, that's what I can say about my story.
Look, thank you so much. I think we're all delighted that your daughter was able to get that transplant and everything worked out finally. Thank you for sharing that really difficult but insightful story for all of us to hear. Fidel, can you talk, maybe like looked at some challenge that you faced in your journey and how you were able to overcome? You're muted. Fidel, you're muted.
Muted. Okay, you got me? All right.
We can hear you now.
All right. So my journey to the US actually started, as you said in the introduction, very good introduction, actually. But it started way in the Congo, some 20 some years, almost 30 years ago, when I was 12. And I had to survive those two wars, and I had to cross those countries into Zimbabwe trying to find safety. I found when I arrived in Zimbabwe, they welcomed me, and for the first time, I was declared or named, called a refugee. So they gave me the refugee status in Zimbabwe. They sent me to a refugee camp in Zimbabwe, which was in the middle of a game park, thousands of miles away from the cities. And we were not allowed to go to the city without permission. We had to live in that camp, be fed, be provided of, and everything. And that was it. And I was by myself. So for the first couple of years, I had to cry, missing my parents. I was alone. And then a few years later, I kind of accepted to live with with the reality that maybe, I'm an orphan. Maybe they've died, and I'm just alone. And after that, then I started actually trying to figure out how I can survive in those environments. So, playing soccer in that small refugee camp with other refugees and just sitting down and playing games as the night goes, you eat, you sleep, you eat, you sleep. And that was it. But in the first, after 1 year of doing that, I kind of learned some English because I couldn't speak English, arriving in Zimbabwe from Congo. Swahili and French were my language. I learned English after the first year, and I was able to be given a scholarship to go to high school in the villages around the camp. And that became another part of my life where I'll go to school for 3 months in the village and then come for holidays in the camp. Go to the village for a boarding school, come to the, and then it came to a point where, the story of Robert Mugabe, the president of Zimbabwe, kicked in. And refugees start being mistreated during that moment where Mugabe started chasing the settlers, the Brits and stuff, and trying to take land from them. So refugees, became culprits into that. They were blamed and scapegoated as the ones that caused all the economic fall down, all the sanctions that were imposed on Zimbabwe. The suffering of the Zimbabweans were blamed on refugees and foreigners. So Zimbabweans start attacking refugees. Some of the refugees start advocating through the UN, the human rights, and all those people. Say, can you protect us from the Zimbabweans? But of course, we're in their country. There was no protection, and we had to keep clashing and fighting with them. But during those revolts, when we were fighting and asking for safety, the government also didn't like it and came and arrested everybody who was involved in those demonstrations and the march for the refugees. So all my friends ended up being arrested, and I became a fugitive, running away from the law. And then all my friends got deported back to the Congo after a year of imprisonment, and I had to run out of the country because I was wanted. And I ended up in Botswana, where I became a refugee again in Botswana, living in a Dukwi refugee camp in the middle of the Kalahari Desert in tents. And we're all camping in tents up there for a year. It was so hard and suffering in the sun and the heat. It was so hard for somebody to survive in there. So I had some friends who were running to South Africa because they thought life was better in South Africa, that in South Africa you can work, you can get your own place. There's no refugee camps. So we thought that was a better promise than being stuck in a refugee camp. So there I was off again with some friends. We crossed the borders illegally into South Africa again. Once we arrived in South Africa, I became homeless, sleeping on the street while going to the government office looking for documents to be able to be legal in the country. It took months and months of fighting before the government finally gave me a document that will allow me to stay in South Africa and work. And some friends took me in where we had to sleep in one bedroom, 4 of us, 4 friends in one little bedroom, 2 beds. And they got me my first job in South Africa where I was selling some cosmetic on the street, making $100 a month. And that was it. And I started living off of that. And then we shared, all 4 of us, to pay the little room and a little bit for food, and life moved on. But then I upgraded into the car watching security. So we'll stand at the shopping center, at the mall, and watch cars for people when they go in. When they come out, they tip you. And that had a little more money than selling stuff on the street. So life became a little better. But also the danger of that, we had a lot of criminals that will come and shoot out the mall. They will come and steal cars, and we are watching them, and we fall victims. So we collaborated with the police and got some of those guys arrested. Their friends retaliated and came and shot everybody at the mall, and I had to run and escape South Africa again. So by trying to get away from South Africa, I went to Angola. I fall into some trouble in Angola, trying to get back to my friends in South Africa again, in a different city. I got caught up in Zimbabwe. This is years later. And in Zimbabwe, when I arrived there, Mugabe, well, the UN had changed their their administration. So they had new protection officer, new representative for the United Nations who was looking after refugees. So when I arrived there, I got arrested in Zimbabwe, but the UN came and got me out of prison. And the UN told me to remember the story of my friends earlier who were in trouble and who were arrested and deported. The government of Zimbabwe refused to let me live in Zimbabwe. The UN took me back to the camp because they didn't have anywhere to take me. But and they said you can't be touched here because the camp is a UN land property. The government cannot come here. As long as you stay in the camp, you are safe. But if you leave, they can arrest you. So I stayed in the camp for a little bit. Then the UN tried to work my documents, my paper, with the government, asked me to apologize for the previous, stuff that we did with my friends who were deported. I apologized, wrote letters, but the government denied the apology. And they came and kidnapped me out of the camp. And they kidnapped me when I was going to the UN office and kept me for a couple of weeks. The UN was looking for me. They finally located me at the border of Mozambique and Zimbabwe, where I was about to be thrown into Mozambique. So they rescued me there, brought me back to their office. I refused to leave their office from that moment on because I knew that the next time I'll be dead if, I slip up. So I slept in the UN office for a couple of days, and they started talking to different countries to see where I can be sent because the Zimbabwean government refused to allow me to stay there. Finally, the United States agreed to take me in and gave me some paperwork and said, you're going to America. So I found myself on a plane coming to the US. And now the rest of the journey coming into the US was more challenging because I didn't know where I was going. They say you're going to Boise, Idaho. I had never heard of it. I got on a plane asking everybody along the way. Nobody had heard of Boise, Idaho. When I got to New York, this woman looked at me in the eyes and said, oh my God, you're going to Boise, Idaho. She was a beautiful white woman. And she's like, well, you're going to die over there. And now after all this trouble in Africa, in different countries, and now I'm in America hoping for the best, and this woman in New York say I'm going to die. And I'm like, why, good lady? Why am I going to die? And she was like, well, there's two things. You're either going to be killed because you're black, because they don't like black people over there, or if you survive long enough, you may die from the cold because the winter is so hard. So choose and pick. So I looked at her, I'm like, what should I do? She's like, well, when you get to Boise, here's my phone number. Call me. I'll send you a plane ticket. You can come to me. I have a business where I live, and you're going to love it there. You can work for me. And I live in Texas, and Texas is just like Africa. So I came to Boise afraid of my life. And yes, when I arrived here, yes, I was in fear, but the process is so faster. As a refugee, when I got here, they're like, you have 3 months. They're going to give you food, give you rent, give you everything for 3 months. In those 3 months, you have to get a job, be able to sustain yourself. You have to know all the system. You have to be able to navigate the city yourself. You should know how to drive. You should know all these things in 3 months. That was challenging by itself, let alone I'm afraid. I tried. The first month, they got me a job in the first month, but I had to go to work. I don't have a car. I don't know how to drive. I had to ride a bicycle to work. But guess what? Winter comes, and I'm riding a bicycle in the snow to get to work, falling down multiple times. When I get to work, people laughing at me for being wet and soaked, but nobody tells me that bicycles and snow don't work together. They make me feel like I don't know what I'm doing, and I feel like maybe it's my fault. I don't know how to ride a bicycles in the winter. So all that stress of doing that, trying to learn how to drive, trying to figure the city, I couldn't get it in 3 months. No assistance from nobody after 3 months. I was so confused and I had a nervous breakdown, and I found myself in a mental hospital. This is just in the first year in America, I was in a mental hospital. And that's all. Yeah. So the story is really challenging from there on because in the mental hospital, I had to fight the system. I had to refuse. When I woke up a week later, I regained consciousness. A week later, I found that they were popping me up on medication. I didn't want any medication because I knew I was not crazy. So I had to fight the system to refuse medication. I said, no, I'm not figured out how to deal with it. So the lawyers and judges and stuff start getting involved in the thing. I don't understand any of the system. All I know is to say, no, I don't want it. So they made me sign papers and documents that if we don't let you out, but if anything happened there, you are liable for anything that you do there. And you have to follow therapy. So I got out of mental clinic, started for going through therapy. And through therapy and everything, I found a church that I started going to. The pastor of that church told me to start writing everything that I'm going through at night when I sleep, when I can't sleep. So when the anxiety attack comes, I'll start writing down all my stories, all my pen, and I'll start sharing with people at the YMCA. I start going to YMCA, all those things together. They start making me feel relieved from all the pressure and the pain. So writing them down, talking about it, and going to meet with new people, it started making me feel comfortable with myself. And over a couple months or a year, I started feeling separated from my pain and my story. Yes, I can talk about them, but yes, they don't torture me and make me cry anymore like they used to. And I continue with that routine as a therapy for me, and it kind of worked out for me. And that's how I adjusted and became part of this society, picked good friends, good community, built it around me, and life since then, has become a little better than it was before.
Fantastic, Fidel. Thank you so much for sharing that story. I mean, I could sit here and listen to you for another hour.
Thank you.
Thank you again for doing that. Well, Victor, you work with, as a digital organizer, you work with a lot of community leaders in both in where you are as well as across the country, and as well as newly arrived communities. Do you mind talking about some of the challenge that you have seen or experienced with as you work with these communities, and what do you see that sort of contributes to the to overcoming those challenges?
Yeah, thank you, Abdi. Well, I'd like to first start off by saying thank you for having me and the rest of the panelists, and thank you, Luke and Fidel, for sharing your powerful stories. Unfortunately, those are stories that I have heard from a lot of different community members. Most of my colleagues are actually also people from Congo, folks who have been forcibly displaced at some point of their lives and trying to, build their own little home here in the U.S. now. But those are it's all of those stories that we hear about. The story of Fidel and Luke, they're unique, and at the same time, they're universal. A lot of people actually go through those, like the challenges of accessing healthcare by newcomers, whether they are refugees, asylum seekers, undocumented folks. It's very real. Being able to adapt to the new laws, learning how to navigate the directions or transportation, public transportation, right? Like all of those are real challenges that immigrants and refugees face. So very familiar with those things, and fortunately, we have a group of community organizers that listen to these stories, powerful stories from community members that have protections for immigrants and refugees, and they kind of try to figure out what does it mean to actually go through this, and are there other people in your community that have also experienced this, and if so, what can we do about it? Is there something that we can actually change about this? So for example, in North Carolina, there's a couple of organizers who are working to provide access to more languages at the DMV, so that way you no longer have to use a bike to work. If you have access to a vehicle, but you need to take an exam, and they didn't have the exam available in your language, then maybe they will through this initiative. Now, let's say that you actually came from another, you were resettled into the US from a different country, and you had your licenses, and you went to school to become a nurse, or you went to school to become a teacher. Well, you come to the US, and oftentimes those are programs, or those are certifications that don't transfer over. So some of my colleagues are also looking at those initiatives, right? What does it mean to actually go through this, and what are the things that we're able to do so that way in the future, when we work collectively and we work when we push elected officials to do what's right, to stand up for immigrants and refugees, and to protect and to expand the protections and the opportunities that we have, maybe maybe they'll be able to become a teacher after they regain their license in the US, or they regain some of the maybe even educational opportunities that they might have not had in other places. So those are stories that we hear all the time, and I'm grateful to be working in a space with other community organizers who are, working with community members like Luke and Fidel to actually change the conditions in which immigrants or refugees live here in the US.
Thank you, Victor. I would like to remind, for those of you who are watching us, you can leave any questions that you have anytime. We will be able to dive into those questions in the next few minutes. I'd like to go back to Luke. Luke, thank you for leading us, your story from the beginning to obviously where you are now, contributing and giving back to your community. So you have a podcast, and you're speaking the narrative. You sort of understand the challenges, and you're one of those members that went through those challenges. So can you speak a little bit about the impact that you sort of notice this contribution is making to the community overall?
Thank you, Abdi. So the podcast is built on a very simple premise that immigrants have voices, but they very often withhold opinions for themselves. So there's a number of vocal immigrants across the spectrum, not just here in Maine, but across the US. And Abdi is actually one of them. An immigrant is just anyone who's not born in the US, but who lives in the US, in the case of American immigrants. And what I had noticed over the past 7 years while living and working in Maine is that there was a lot of times when there was really material for a feedback to the traditional American community, but people were reluctant to open up, especially when there was poor coverage about immigrants. When I say poor coverage, I'm not just talking about people targeting those who are arriving through the southern border, but I'm talking about the aggregates. Sometimes when they say immigrants or things like what Donald Trump has been saying recently, the immigrants are poisoning the blood of the American society. That's an aggregate. It's indiscriminately talking about immigrants without considering the fact that there are layers and there's quite a diversity within the immigrant community. And not just that, in the local news reports, really, because I am someone who keeps an eye open on local and national and even international news reports, I have noticed a trend of portraying the immigrants in a manner that's very counterproductive, that's not very constructive. And unfortunately, immigrants know about these things, but very often choose to remain silent. Why? Because they feel like I was not born here, although I might have achieved the status of an American citizen, but I'm not really a first zone citizen. I'm more like a second rank citizen. That's how a lot of the first generation immigrants are feeling about themselves. Those who very often tend to be vocal are second generation immigrants. The kids who have come here very young or were born on US territory, they feel like they're more entitled to an opinion. And that's really the task I've assigned to myself to try and change. This is my second attempt. Last year, I tried to launch the podcast because I have a public relations and strategic communication background. I thought about the most constructive ways to do this and tried to allure intellectual, constructive opinions of immigrants on my platform. But woefully, a lot of the people I had approached were reluctant to open up and talk, because no one really wants to come on record. People talk about these things. They talk about how they feel when, for example, they're listening to Tucker Carlson. Fidel and I were from the Congo, and very recently, I believe, episode 30 of Tucker Carlson's show on Twitter, on X.com, was totally dedicated, not totally dedicated, but focused on the immigrants from the Congo. But he was portraying them, not just them, but us, as people who are coming from a barbaric background, a bunch of savage who should never be allowed to mix with the natural American population. I don't even know what it really means, natural, So at the end of the day, these are things that resound deep inside my soul and my intellectual side, my mind, and I decided something needs to be done about it to tackle this issue. We need to bring up some sort of informational counterpart to all these vitriol and bad narratives. We're not going to scoop down the way they do and get into vitriol as well, but rather we're going to sort of dissect each and every segment of their statements and try to give some feedback to it. But I did not want to go abruptly and be abrasive and just tackle the issues by calling out people by name and saying who this person say this and that person say that. Although there's plenty of subject matter in the local and national news, I decided to rather try to tackle the concepts, the construct of all these concepts. And I started by dedicating the first month of the podcast to journalism and coverage of immigrant situations, both in the state of Maine and across the US. I've invited a few people to the podcast to try and talk about it. I started with a professor of journalism who's also an expert in terms of propaganda and some other aspect that could be relevant to the podcast. But then it became very hard for me to get more people to come on the show. This is part of the difficulty because on the one hand, it could be a lofty initiative, a highly commendable initiative, but the problem is you're common Joe. No one knows about your name except for the handful of people who interact with you. And with that, you don't really have what it takes to allure big names to your platform. And when I'm saying big names, I'm talking about people who have authority in a specific field. For example, I was trying to bring someone who's a background in law and who had a very deep understanding of the First Amendment rights, because most of the vitriol that we hear and see on the local and national media about immigrants are predicated on First Amendment rights. People are free to speak their mind. But that freedom sort of infringes on the identity and the feeling of safety that some people in the community have. And those are things that I really wanted to bring to the forefront in the heat of the community in order to have a constructive discussion. I was hoping that it can be a platform where we can constructively trade intellectual viewpoints, because at the end of the day, it's all about the vantage point. It's all about how people view a certain matter. And so it's a fledgling effort. What I can see is the traction in terms of the number of people listening to the podcast. We've launched for the past 1 month only. And for the past 1 month, we have about almost 300 people downloaded the podcast. And, Maine is a small place, but 300 people downloaded the podcast, but we're able to reach 101 cities around the world, not just the US, because when I get the data analytics, it shows that we had reached 101 cities in 10 countries and 4 continents overnight. For some reason, people seem to be showing interest for it. And this is a platform I'm hoping to build on. And now that I know people like Fidel, I believe we're going to figure out a way to bring him over. And why not Victor? And why not Abdi? And have a little bit of an in focus on your personal expertise and experience as an immigrant. Because I believe part of why all this vitriolic language is thriving is because the perception that people have of immigrant is not a lofty one. They don't really value immigrants for the most part. We are more like expendable material, political material, and you mostly hear about immigrants overall, those who came here by air and those who walked through the southern border. Altogether, you mostly hear about us as an aggregate, mostly when we're in the heated months leading to national elections. And that's the case right now with, the Donald Trump and Biden remake. And immigration is one of the top 3 issues. So I really felt like this was the relevant moment for me to bring up this discussion and to start sort of creating a constructive exchange around it. Although it's not going to be possible without the involvement of other people who are more than willing to come on record and talk openly about it. That's pretty much what I can say so far.
Thank you. Look, I think I think those attempts to try to take back the narrative, obviously everyone here understands that refugee and migration is up front when it comes to the US elections, and it's a major issue. And with that, I think we appreciate your efforts to bring the true voice, the voice of the communities seeking asylum, communities who are from refugees background or immigrants speaking up. Fidel, you are the Idaho Refugee Congress delegate, and with your experience, how would you describe, or what's your experience of the narrative that refugees and communities of immigrants would be using to take back the overall narrative that's often used against refugees? You're muted.
Oh yeah, it's on your side. You got me?
I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, you can hear me now. All right. Over the years, what I've learned, and I've tried to study, because the biggest things that I had to fight in my earlier days in Idaho, yes, the lady in the airport was right. Yes, there was a lot of racism in Idaho when I arrived years back. And yes, I had to find it hard for me to navigate. And I let a lot of it actually offending me. And most of that racism also is coming from the mainstream media. It comes from the leadership. And most of these leaders are more educated and sophisticated, where they know that what they are telling is not the truth, but they know that without telling that they won't be elected, because that's what the citizens, the voters, wants to hear. So Donald Trump is not racist, is not silly, is not stupid. Biden is not stupid when he's pushing that Donald Trump is racist. That can't be a fight of them fighting each other to say who is the racist, who is not, because then you just kind of forcing to us that some people don't like us. So it's not helping nobody. And all of them know that, but they're doing it because they know it gets them voters. Donald Trump will condone anybody who's racist out there directly, because if he does, that is going to alienate a bunch of voters who end up going somewhere else. So I understand the leaders and the medias and all these people, they push this narrative of insulting, demeaning, demonizing immigrants in a sense to try to push a certain narrative for their parties and their groups to get votes. But in reality, we all know what the truth is. And that's why when you watch those mainstream medias, like my brother Victor there says, you will never see a refugee on those panels debating those people who are pushing this narrative. They are not experts on refugees. They don't know nothing about our life stories. So when they are debating, people who are crossing the southern borders, I've crossed thousands of borders illegally during my times. Now, that's a figure of speech, but a few borders illegally during my time as a refugee, that I understand the struggle of those people coming from South America and coming into these countries and what they have to go through and why they're doing that. Because I have done it the same way in South Africa to Zimbabwe, from Zimbabwe to somewhere, looking for a better life for myself. Not because I wanted to, I was forced into that situation. But they'll never have me up there to kind of explain the situation that's happening up there, because I can relate to those people up there. Yes, they are breaking the law, but why are they breaking the law? And nobody ever wanted to fix the issue, because if they fix it, then they'll never have anything to run on. So if you go back and listen to tapes from 1,000 years, from 100 years back or 50 years back, the elections 20 years ago, the immigration issues is still the same things. They're saying the same thing about immigrants that they're saying today, because one party has to act like they love immigrants. The other one has to act like, oh, we don't. We want to, It's the same thing. So what I've learned over the years, so I understood that we are in a country where everything is polarized. The country is divided now since I arrived until now, because there's these two parties that are acting a certain way and feed misinformation to their people, whatever they want to hear to get elected. So my job became, rather than being offended by what people say to me or what I hear on the news, is to educate those that are in front of me and tell them what is really the truth. If they choose to listen to me, then I can say, no, this is not the truth. There is these layers of immigration. There is people who are crossing the borders illegally. There are people who come here as refugees. There are people who came here as students, then to choose to switch into legal status, apply for asylum. There are those who, I have to break it down to them to make them understand that, first of all, it's not all of them that are there. So when you meet somebody, don't directly assume that they just crossed the southern border and they're here to poison the blood. Nobody's coming here to poison any blood. And then number two, we know, and the leaders know, and everyone knows that immigrants actually contribute massively to these countries. And as a result of that, if you look back at anybody who they're putting up there as their heroes, from the Elon Musk who on Twitter and everywhere, all those are immigrants. Elon Musk is from South Africa. All these people are immigrants. So when you're insulting immigrants, you're definitely insulting the people who are creating the platform for you guys to. So I understand that. So I fall into that platform of saying I will educate rather than be offended. If I'm in that. So number two, I like what Victor said earlier, that immigrants have premises, but they choose to hold their opinions to themselves. That is true. So I don't volunteer my opinions where it's not needed, especially in a divided country, because then you don't know how people will react. But if I'm in an environment where people are talking about these issues and I'm a part of it, I will try to make sure I correct the narrative, educate, and then move on. Because without doing that, then you're just letting this misinformation continue. And if you have a platform like what Victor has, then it's a plus. You have to continue doing it on your platform, and see if you'll get more guests who come and share these things and push in one way or another. Maybe more people will join that, and there will be a massive force that can actually push against this huge wall of information, which is coming from powerful people. So it's hard to push back nationally, but you can push back in your communities. You can push back in your city, in your state. That can be done, and that's all. I've been able to do that in Idaho, in Boise. When I arrived here, I realized that the city had people who didn't believe in what I am and who didn't want me here, and there were people who really did want me here. So I started selecting and picking, choosing where I will be, where I'm accepted, and build my own community around those people who accept me. And together with those people, we can spread the news and information of what positive, all those kind of things. And over time, we win some people, we will lose some people, but we'll keep a safer and better environment. And that's how I've managed to accustom. So I never really, nothing ever changed in Boise from when I came to now, but I accustomed to the situation. I adjusted myself and create my own community, and it's been great so far. So for me, that's I really suffer those kind of things, but there is nothing you can do something, but do it from bottom up. Yeah, you can't fight those people up there because they know what they're doing, and they're doing it intentionally.
Thank you. Absolutely. I think those are the narratives we should be hearing. Caroline said one of the false narratives is that refugees are a big financial strain. There are certainly more than a research that has proven that wrong. So we appreciate your comment, Caroline. Thank you very much. Victor, what would you say, or what support would you like to see from, say, local governments and organizations that can help achieve the goals of sort of taking those narratives back and supporting, in general, the new communities that join the overall general communities in the United States?
Well, that's a good question. Feel like, do we have enough time to answer that? No, I mean, I think it's kind of like I did to what Alex were saying, right? It's like I think that oftentimes immigrants or refugees are used as political pawns, and so I feel like just that simple idea of like stop using immigrants or refugees as political pawns, stop like trying to make it seem like there is good and bad immigrants. Like we don't talk in mass media perspective, like we don't talk about good, bad citizens. So why do that with immigrants and refugees? But I do think that that voters or residents of the US have like a big question to ask themselves. Like when you actually start when this issue is being politicized, then who's that really benefiting? Because I can tell you that from my own perspective, like I've worked a job like for $5 an hour at one point, and I had to lie. I was prepared to lie in case somebody showed up asking questions. And so that's not benefiting me. Like me being like working behind the shadows or living behind the shadows is not benefiting me. It's not benefiting the other person. Let's in this scenario, let's say the white person that is believes to be anti-immigrant. Like, it's not benefiting them because they may be out of a job that they could have gotten, and somebody's telling them that I'm taking their job for $5 an hour. So who's really winning here? And there's somebody that's profiting off of this. And I think that voters and US residents have that question to ask themselves, like, who is it really benefiting to actually like put the finger at? I'm thinking of the Spider-Man meme, like who's at blame here? And especially people born in the US because of the freedoms. Like, at what point do you begin to protect your freedom of movement? Climate change, the impacts of climate change are real. And people are being restricted movement in so many different ways. And again, who does that really benefit? So I think that, elected officials at all levels, whether they are in a federal level, whether they are in a local level, maybe even like school board, as Miguel mentioned, like it all starts from the bottom. I think that real meaningful change and sustainable change happens from the bottom up. So I will say that my ask for them would be to actually listen to the voices of impacted people. I think that impacted people are the best folks who can provide the best solutions to the problem because they've experienced it. Like, we are experts of our own stories. We're experts of our own experiences. So listen to what, impacted people have to bring to the table. Listen to the stories or to the solutions that they're providing. And not just respond with like, that's too much work. We don't have the budget for that. But we do have money for destabilizing our home countries through war. We do have incentives for corporations that ultimately are the ones who are exploiting our labor. So I think, reprioritizing those issues. And also, like, if they're passing legislation, like, what does it mean to also pass legislation that's clean versus, okay, like, we'll provide people a pathway to citizenship, for example, but in return, we're going to build a wall. We're gonna dismantle the refugee admissions program again, or something along those lines. So, I think it's about driving and listening to the stories and the change and the policies that are being driven by impacted people. And some of those ways is like, some of the efforts that Church World Service is driving by pushing elected officials to actually do humane things that represent our values as people, to provide a welcoming communities, welcoming policies for immigrants and refugees, like looking for safety. Because at the end of the day, we all deserve a safe place to call home, but also like we deserve to continue to protect and expand our freedom of movement.
Excellent. Well, thank you. I remember about 10 years ago when I moved to the US, the number of globally displaced, including refugees, was about 60 million, right? And I was asked the question of what do you hope? What is, what do you want to see? And I remember saying, I want that number to go down. I want more people to, to be safe in where they call home. And, and shockingly today, that number is 110 million. So it has skyrocketed, as you can see. And it's not only conflicts and persecution, there's a lot more other concerns, including climate change, that's obviously driving a lot of people out of places they felt comfortable previously. With that, what is each one of your, Luke, let's begin with you. What's your message for World Refugee Day? As we're in June, it's also Immigrant Heritage Month. So what message would you would you tell the world that's listening to you and watching you?
Well, I think it's important to remember that every refugee or every immigrant's journey usually starts with a life event. Life happens. Today, Americans, for the most part, are living in the US, but who knows, maybe what climate change could bring tomorrow, and Americans could become a bunch of refugees abroad. You might be rushing to places you usually don't go to. You could be coming to my home country in the Congo. You could be trying to move to Africa as refugees, as asylum seekers. So I think it is important for people to always have a measure of events and keep uh, in their forefront our shared humanity. Because if we forget about the fact that we're human and therefore we're subject to human experiences, when we encounter it, people will tend to treat us to our own medicine at times. I'm not forecasting any disaster for the US or wishing people to go through the life events that some of us have experienced, but I'm just trying to make it clear that by looking closely into the situation of immigrants and refugees and asylum seekers and everybody who's coming to the US, you'll find out that their hopes and their fears are pretty much shared. Oh, you have everything in common. Besides, by looking closely at the concepts, you will realize that sometimes your apprehension toward immigrants could be just dictated by manipulation, conceptual manipulation, because you've been overexposed to the media, overexposed to technologies, overexposed to politicians who have no interest whatsoever in showing their own immigrant background to you, because actually they're the child of the child of an immigrant, possibly. And they're forgetting about the fact that when their ancestors got here in the first place, they had to squat in some places. And if you're Italian, if you're Irish, if you're a Catholic Canadian living in the US, you were not welcome until very recently. You were the scum of the earth, unfortunately, where some of us are finding ourselves right now. I think one of the things I see changing in the overall narratives around immigration in the US right now, it's the fact that there's an increase in the number of immigrants of color. I'm not trying to racialize, turn this into a racial discussion. But I think it's also one of the elements that are vectors in the vitriol, in all the poor narratives. And just as we're saying, not just that the voice of immigrants is lacking in important platforms where people's opinions are being shaped and reshaped toward the immigrants, and most of these mainstream companies, whether it's CNN or Fox News or others, they usually don't hire the people who are the subject matter, but they rather want to get people who have an approximate perception of them. That's why in discussing the concepts that I'm covering on my podcast, I'm talking about the EMIC approach and the ETIC approach. EMIC, EMIC, is simply the fact of living the experience by immersing yourself into the culture, into a people's situation. I think a lot of people will come to an understanding of the reason why people are moving here and trying to live here once they find themselves in the situation of those people. What would you do if you were in Fidel's situation? Would you have stayed where he was born, or would you have moved as well? It's just a human decision. And also, the politicians know better. And they're so good at manipulating situations and using a leverage, turning it to a leverage for their own benefit, whether it's for fundraising, fear mongering, and winning elections at the end of the day. I think it's going to live with them in their conscience. But we do our part as advocates by sometimes lobbying them, which is part of what I'm doing here in Maine, and making sure that they can come to the right side of history.
Wonderful. Thank you, Luke. Appreciate that. We have 1 minute to end this panel, and Fidel and Victor, I will let you very briefly talk about what your message is of World Refugee Day, and also for those who can see the comments, thank you, Caroline, for that message as well. Go for it, Fidel.
So first of all, above everything, this World Refugee Day, I want everybody, all Americans, to understand and to know that we love America. There is no place I'd rather be rather than America. I lived in Congo for 13 years. I lived in around Africa searching for better life for less than 10 years. But I've lived in America for 20 years, so more than any place else. So this is home for me. I want nothing better for America than for the country to remain as good and great as as I found it. My children live here. They're Americans. I want nothing other than this country to be great. America is a country that has great promises to the immigrants that comes here, great consideration as a whole, the country as a whole, that the media and everybody doesn't tell you. So when we are talking about immigrants, the one thing that they forget to tell you that we are not immigrants anymore. We are Americans. This is home. After 5 years in this country, you become an American. Every immigrant that came here legally, after 5 years, they become Americans, and they love this country sometimes more than people who were born here, because we got to achieve. It's something that we achieve by struggling and striving for. And most of the people who were born here, sometimes they take it for granted because they don't know the strive of trying to be part of this great country. But the message that I want to leave is the message of the mental health struggles of immigrants. This World Refugee Day, I want that to be taken into consideration. When people come here, the stress and the struggle they faced and they suffered before they get here is so much overwhelming that when they arrived here, if they hear all of that in the news, there's nowhere else for them to go than to have a mental breakdown like myself. So when they get here, they want to have a better welcoming, better consideration. They have suffered so much. So let's welcome our immigrants when they arrive here and give them an opportunity and a playground for them to succeed and become part of this great nation in 5 years. Because we are
Absolutely.
all Americans and we love America.
Thank you, Fidel, really. Victor, very briefly.
Man, briefly, that's a lot of pressure. But I think that, I'm really excited about World Refugee Day, National Immigrant Heritage Month. I think that this is a month that we get to celebrate all of our contributions, our existence, our well-being, our hardships, because we are ultimately paving the way for a better future for future generations. And I'm very grateful to be in this work with you all, and I appreciate the support from other folks. And ultimately, borders separate beautiful landscapes, they separate beautiful cultures, and we all deserve, no matter whether we are native or newcomers, we all deserve a better future.
Thank you very much. And everyone who's watching, please make sure that you visit our World Refugee Day page, which you can see appearing on the screen. We have a lot of stories that we're working on here at Church World Service that will be World Refugee Day paced, as well as Immigrant Heritage Month. I want to especially thank our panelists. Thank you, Luke, Fidel, and Victor. This was incredible, and I really, really appreciate your insights. I'm sure everyone who's watched feels the same way. And thank you, Caroline. I wholeheartedly agree with you that the stories of our panelists is what makes everyday Americans, what everyday American should hear. So thank you so much, and keep working on all those great stuff that you're working on. And thanks to everyone who's joined us. And I hope we will see you at some point in the future. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Indeed. Thank you.